This episode of the 10-Minute Bible Hour is brought to you by Marmot, not the company, the animal. Do you remember where you were on September 12th, 1988? I know some of you are like, no, I was still dead back then, but some of you were already alive. I was, and I remember where I was sitting. I was in my 7th grade homeroom class at this private Christian school I was going to. And my teacher there was a lady who had recently read 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1988 or something like that. There was this guy, a scientist wizard, who had looked at the stars and space. I don't actually remember what his methodology was, but he did some math and it was correct. And he proved with science that Jesus was coming back the next day, September 13th. And since my teacher had read this and done the math as well, she just took the day to game this thing out with us. Like, what's heaven going to be like? What's it going to be like for the people who didn't sign up? All of that. And thankfully, we were all wondering if she would take this to its logical ends. She did. She canceled homework. So we had nothing to do. And I remember feeling, on the one hand, excited. I don't know, it'd be pretty cool to have God show up. And I'm sure I'm right about everything, so he'll definitely be happy with me. So that'll be great. Yeah, come judge the quick and the dead. I'm on the good list. But another part of me felt pretty skeptical about this because I'd been around the Bible a little bit at that point. And I definitely remember there's something Jesus said about nobody knowing the day or the hour when that is going to go down. And I raised that question and she gave me the don't think about that. And I was like, okay, I won't think about that then if it means no homework. So I went home, I talked with my dad. He properly lowered expectations. And then the next morning I woke up and Jesus had not returned. And I had an idea. So I went to school, got there as early as I could, made sure to make myself visible and evident to lots of people. And then I sneaked into my homeroom class before anyone, changed clothes real quick, and left them all laying there empty along with my shoes at my desk, just to make them think that I was the only one who got taken. Okay, I didn't actually do that, but I deeply wish I had. It's like one of those things where somebody says something and you're like, you are, but then 10 seconds later you think of what you should have said. It's a missed opportunity, one of the greatest regrets of my life. No, I just went to class like a person, and as the day went along, everybody got sadder. So they figured out that probably Jesus wasn't probably going to come back. And then the next day, we all just had to make up our homework and tests and quizzes because apparently the administration would not accept thought Jesus was coming back as a reason for flagging behind on all of our actual work. 1988 is not the first time that somebody had the idea that they could solve this whole riddle. It's happened a lot since, and it actually happened a lot before. We know that in 999, people started freaking out about the Y1K bug, and so they started donating money and stuff to the church and trying to square accounts. And there was a big panic, and hopefully everybody went back to being debauched the next day when nothing really happened. In the Middle Ages, some of these prognosticators came up with ideas about when Armageddon was going to happen, including some super mega science geniuses. And then I think it was Leonardo da Vinci who actually spent a good chunk of his later life going through all of these kind of prophecies and predictions, not to make one of his own, but as a service to everyone so that they wouldn't be taken in by these ridiculous claims. Well, you get up into the 1800s, 1900s, and 2000s, and now you have some new theological structures that really lend themselves to this kind of rapture-mongering, end times predicting obsession stuff. I don't need to get into what these different branches of Christianity are. And for those of you Catholics who are watching this, and you're like, yeah, dumb Protestants, you stupid end timesing, you have people who do it too. So let's just admit we're in the same boat here. And so by the time you get into the 20th century, man, you're getting these predictions, every year or two, it seems like something happens. And nothing ever comes of it. And it's always somebody else's fault, or God changed his mind and we averted disaster. Sometimes it twists and warps around into being a full-on cult kind of thing, where the central defining belief of this cult is the world will end on X day. And you would think that, generally speaking, when people realized the world didn't end, they would all reject their old beliefs and go back to whatever their way of life was before that. There's been some interesting research done, including one study where people actually infiltrated an end-of-the-world cult, and when it didn't happen, They doubled down. They tripled down because they couldn't afford to be wrong about this thing. They'd given up so much. Well, in the last few years, you would think, man, the rise of the internet, we're so sophisticated now. We think, we share ideas. Everybody has access to all of the science and all of the math all the time. Nobody would fall for that stuff. Wrong! It seems like these things are coming up at a greater rate than ever. And I want to talk about a few of these that have come up recently that have grabbed a ton of headlines, and we'll get into those in just a minute. But before I do, just a disclaimer here. I'm going for a tone of graciousness on this channel. I really don't want to do religious fights, and I'm not trying to pick a religious fight with this one either, but there's no way I'm going to be able to hide my biases here. I think these kind of predictions are complete horse crap. I think they are hoaxes perpetrated usually by clever people intentionally to exploit weaker and more vulnerable people for their loyalty and for their money. I'm sure there are some folks who just deeply believe that everybody else in the history of all of planet Earth was too stupid to crack the code. Because they're so smart and clever, they were able to connect all of the red yarn around the thumbtacks and newspaper clippings on their wall and figure it out. I think they're crazy. I think they're dead wrong. I think the Bible says they're all going to be wrong, but maybe they're not evil. Whatever the case. I'm not holding back. I'm telling you, I think this stuff is dumb. I'm going to look at it from the perspective of someone who thinks it's dumb. So if you happen to be on the other side of this argument from me, I would like to think we can still get along, but there's no point in me hiding the fact that I really disagree with you on this point. So let's look at some of these Bible hoaxes in specific. I'm starting to get a little bit ahead of myself here. So we're going to talk more about the implications and the problems with the end of the world prediction mongering that's going on. But before we get further down that road, let's look at a few common examples that have cropped up in the last few months or years so you just know what I'm talking about and that we're on the same page. One headline that I've seen a lot quickly is some variation of this. Life returning to the Dead Sea? Biblical prophecy fulfilled? Question mark. And I have a journalism buddy who was telling me a while back that anytime you see a question mark at the end of the headline, the answer should be no. And I think here that truism definitely applies. So the passage that we're referencing here is one from Ezekiel 47. We'll look at that in just a second. The Dead Sea has been receding for a really long time. And as it goes down, it leaves little pools of water. And apparently somebody saw that one of those pools has become fresh enough that little tilapia fry are swimming around in there, and there's some algae or bacteria mat or something. Now, in truth, there's been life in the Dead Sea for ages. I think dating as far back as the 1930s, scientists have been aware of bacteria mats living at the bottom of the Dead Sea. And we also know from studies conducted since 2011 that there are freshwater springs that have been underneath the Dead Sea for maybe ever, and that there's a different type of bacterial microscopic life that lives around those freshwater vents. So this isn't a new thing, but somebody got some video of this lately, grainy cell phone video, and they put it up on YouTube, and the prophecy mongers started getting really, really excited. Wow, this proves it! Jesus is coming back, or it's the end of the world, or Armageddon, or they don't agree on what it means. But it's a big deal because Ezekiel 47 has this language about, well, verse 8, he said to me, the water flows toward the eastern region and goes down toward the Arabah, where it enters the sea, the Dead Sea. When it empties into the sea, the water there becomes fresh. Swarms of living creatures will live wherever the river flows. There will be large numbers of fish because this water flows there and makes the salt water fresh. So where the river flows, everything will live. Okay, well, I mean, I guess I can sort of see how somebody could make the connection, kind of. But I do see a few problems. I mean, one, just definitionally, that life isn't really in the Dead Sea. It's in pools that were left behind as the Dead Sea receded. So they're in some new unnamed pond, not really the Dead Sea. But further, what is this language about a river? Great, we're going to have to do that stupid context thing again with the Bible, where we waste all kinds of time reading other verses, like the one I just looked at isn't enough, but humor me, I guess. Okay, so, okay, 47 verse 1. Okay, the man, so some kind of messenger brought me, that must be Ezekiel, back to the entrance of the temple. Oh, so we're at the temple now. That's like 30 miles away in Jerusalem. Okay. And I saw water coming out from under the threshold of the temple toward the east. The east, that's toward the Dead Sea. For the temple faced east, the water was coming down from under the south side of the temple, south of the altar. He then brought me out, and okay, it looks like they went and measured the depth of it, and the further down the new river they got, the deeper it got, and then it went down into the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea was changed. If we look at even more context, come on, how necessary can this be? What we discover is there is some pretty crazy figurative imagery throughout Ezekiel. And there's not a lot of great reason to believe that this is some kind of very specific literal omen. In fact, nothing about Ezekiel reads like this is an omen to look for, like a swallow or a raven on the eve of battle, or ripping apart the entrails of some poor bird with a bloody-fingered soothsayer to be like, aha! These full bowels tell me that your army's luck will turn to poop. Like, that's the kind of stuff that, I don't know, like paganism is about that, right? Yet somehow, the prophecy-mongering crowd reads stuff like this, and rather than seeing it in the larger picture of God's redemptive plan unfolding, and there being a symbolic indication of this redemption continuing to move forward and coming to some sort of completion, they choose to interpret it as though it is more of a pagan omen. And that just doesn't hold up. Now, interestingly, in Revelation chapter 22, this same thing, or something that looks a lot like it, gets addressed. And if at this point in the video you're like, hey, well, wait a minute, there's more about Ezekiel, and you're only going to look at one verse in Revelation, look, that is a completely fair complaint, and I am not going to argue with you. What I will tell you is this. Revelation is both part of the Bible and also an interpretive black hole that we do not have time to go down. So we're just going to look at this one little part, but I think you'll see the comparisons. Revelation 22, right at the end of the unfolding of all things. I think it's verse 2. Yes, we'll just start in verse 1. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse. The throne of God and the Lamb will be in the city, and the servants will serve him, and they'll see his face, and everything will be awesome. So it looks like this whole Ezekiel thing is more of a picture of a redemption that is again touched on and characterized at the very end of the Bible, that involves God and Jesus and points to all the things that are in between. Apocalyptic literature in the Bible, that's the stuff that's predictive about end time stuff, has to be interpreted in light of the rest of the Bible and not the other way around, or else you're violating the basic life principle of always interpret the less clear in light of the more clear. Bottom line, I think it is fascinating that there could be fish for me to catch in the Dead Sea the next time I go to the Dead Sea or near the Dead Sea. That's really interesting. I think different kinds of bacteria living at different depths of water, super fascinating. Different types of microscopic life living in super saline parts of the sea versus less saline, brackish parts near these vents. Oh my goodness. Like, get me in scuba gear and let me go see that for myself. That is so dang cool. But nothing that the prophecy actually says is actually happening. There's no river flowing out of where the temple used to be in Jerusalem. What? Huh? There's no completion of this that's already occurred. This stuff that is also described here about like nobody hurting anymore and everybody seeing God's face and things being better. That's not happening. No, we're reinterpreting this whole there's a fish in the pond thing as an omen in a pagan sense, instead of in the sense that's intended biblically. Okay, we're not in enough of a fight yet for those of you who are really into this expression of Christianity. I still think we're going to be okay, but let's see what we can do about making it worse yet. Do you remember a couple years ago when wherever you looked on the internet, it seemed like you would see some new, again, tabloid-style headline about the blood moon? And the blood moon is, let me see if I can get this right, is first of all a term that didn't really exist, according to my astronomy friends, until this whole religious movement occurred a couple years ago. It is a prophecy that was put forward by a guy named Mark Biltz and a guy named Pastor John Hagee, a dude with whom I find myself disagreeing on tons of stuff. And they looked at the math and the charts and the facts and the figures, and they lined it all up with the Hebrew calendar and the Jewish festivals and celebrations, and figured out that something crazy was going to go down anytime that 4 full lunar eclipses occurred within the same year or 18 months or some window of time. Not 3, it's not that, and not 5, it's not that either. It's 4 because of reasons, because 4 is a number that is a number. And so they went back through history and they looked up other times this had occurred. And frankly, it's just not that rare, for starters. The solar eclipse that a lot of you got to watch last year, I watched it right out here, it's mind-boggling. That's a pretty unique event to see the sun fully blocked out for a period of time. But lunar eclipses, those happen a lot more often. The math, the size of the celestial bodies involved makes it a more frequent occurrence. And because Jewish holidays and festivals line up overwhelmingly with full moons, the lunar eclipses and Jewish festivals overlap a lot. And so you go back through history, and what Hagee figured out was that he could find 3 or 4 examples of something significant happening with Jewish people, either kind of before or possibly after one of these tetrad of 4 full moons, the blood moon, because sometimes apparently lunar eclipses are kind of red depending on what the atmosphere is like. So he goes digging through the Bible and comes across this verse in Joel chapter 2 and verse 30. And this whole passage is about the day of the Lord, and it is about a reckoning. It's kind of scary stuff. And he gets here and he says, verse 29, even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days. That sounds nice. I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth. Interesting. Blood and fire and billows of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. That settles it. The moon will turn to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. The problem with that is the moon has turned to blood before now 11 billion times. It's a very frequent occurrence. There hasn't been an apocalypse yet, or Jesus hasn't come back riding on the clouds to judge, quicken the dead yet. And also, his prophecy doesn't do anything to take into account the part about the sun will be turned to darkness. This is blood moons. So here would be my summary of this thing. They just made some stuff up. They found a pattern that nobody else had thought of yet, and as some Christians are willing to do, they found a marketable niche that nobody had thought of yet in a 2,000-year-old religion. And sadly, that kind of stuff really sells, especially when you put a catchy name on it, like blood moon. So John Hagee, in particular, predicted that something significant would happen with the Jews around this blood moon time. But nothing did. I don't know. There's nothing. There's no thing. Like he would say that the refounding of the Jewish state was associated with a blood moon. Nothing happened like that. He would say that the 6 Days War was associated with the blood moon in the 60s. Nothing happened like that. He would say that the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in the late Middle Ages was associated with a blood moon. Nothing happened like that. So I guess by making incredibly vague predictions, you can't really be held to account for saying stuff and doing end times mongering. But I can tell you one thing he didn't do: refund the price of all those books that people bought to obsess about blood moons and to be, I guess, emotionally prepared for the thing that couldn't be named, but that was definitely going to happen, but maybe not. That kind of stuff draws a ton of hype, but has little value. But I'm jumping ahead. We are going to talk about this more in detail, but let's get to the third example first. In the fall of 2018, at the western wall of the temple, so this is Herod's temple that got destroyed in 70 AD by Titus and Vespasian. There's one wall of it left. This is the place where you always famously see Jewish men and completely separated Jewish women going to pray and stuff prayers into the cracks of the wall. I had the chance to go and see that recently too. It's a pretty neat, pretty moving thing to encounter. But apparently over on the women's side, a couple weeks back, whatever, a snake chased a pigeon out of the wall, and then people had to catch the snake and remove it. It wasn't a venomous snake or anything, but you know, it looked pretty substantial from the video. Well, there was a blogger somewhere who said that that means that as long as believers stay close to the law, or Jews stay close to the Torah, they are safe. But if they move away from it, they become in danger. And again, we know that's true because a blogger said it in a blog. And all of these articles, they don't quote any Bible verse or anything, but they all say like, snake emerges from western wall. Bible prophecy fulfilled? There's a question mark. It means no. And again, the answer is no. The only prophecy you're citing in any of these articles is something that a blogger wrote a couple days after it happened. And I don't know, maybe there's some kind of imagery there that can work for one religion or another. That's fine. But to elevate that to the level of prophecy is crazy. Well, if you look a little closer, the people who really think it fulfills some kind of prophecy are talking about Zohar, or what did Madonna do? What do you call it? Kabbalah, the mystical version of Judaism. So I don't even know where they're coming from. The best Christian attempts I've seen to try to Christianize this biblical prophetic fulfillment that points to we're not exactly sure what, but it's interesting, is from Micah chapter 7, verse 16. Nations will see and be ashamed, deprived of all their power. They will lay their hands on their mouths, and their ears will become deaf. They will lick dust like a snake. Like creatures that crawl on the ground, they will come trembling out of their dens. They will turn in fear to the Lord our God, and will be afraid of you. Having trouble connecting the dots? Because I'm having trouble connecting the dots. Like, I guess there's like a snake in there, and the snake came out of something. But again, we're talking about an omen here as it's being interpreted by bloggers and news sites and desperate end times prediction mongerers. I think another way to explain this phenomenon, and hear me out here, because this is going to get a little crazy, is that because snakes are cold-blooded, they will try to usually live in places where they can move between direct sunlight and out of direct sunlight very quickly, and also places that are small and secure so that predators can't get to them, where there also might be readily available food sources in such an environment. Walls with gaps in them that are facing the sun seem like a really great place for snakes to be. And I think there's probably just a snake in there because it makes sense. And that's all. There's no omen here. The Bible doesn't say, keep an eye out for that. Because when you see that snake come out of the wall, it means it's only 7 days till the Ides of March. And then beware of, like, there's no warning. There's no thing to do with any of these. What do you actually do? What is this meant to prompt in you? Well, we've already covered one thing that it's meant to prompt in you, and that is open your mind to submitting to somebody's weird internet leadership and open your wallet so that they get money. Gross. But beyond that, I don't know, a snake came out of the wall, so everybody should repent and turn to God. You know, another thing that tells us to repent and turn to God would be the entire Bible. John the Baptist said that. It seems like Jesus was into that as well. That message is pretty pronounced through the whole thing. And it's common sense from the document in general that if you're not really following God and you figure out that, oh, God is real, or I should probably pay more attention to this, you should move in the other direction and follow God. Whether there's an omen about a snake coming out of the wall really doesn't have anything to do with it. So I don't know, maybe these end times prophecies are meant to light a fire under you so that you'll be like, whoa, there was a fish in a little pool of water by the Dead Sea that somebody filmed on a phone one time. I should tell my friends about Jesus Christ. Well, yeah. Like, I would think any Christian who's read any part of the Bible, like the Great Commission in Matthew 28 comes to mind, would be like, well, if I'm a follower of Jesus, I should probably find ways to graciously and lovingly tell other people about that. Not, there's a fish in a pond somewhere, so maybe now I should try to give away my faith to other people. No, why do we need the fish thing to do that? This is already abundantly clear. It's already abundantly clear on all of these fronts. Maybe the thing we're supposed to do with all of this stuff is decide that we are finally going to believe in God. Maybe it's a way to motivate the non-believer to be like, that settles it. There's definitely a God. I'm in. So maybe the expectation is that for the person who hasn't decided that there's a God yet, maybe they see that there are 4 lunar eclipses, that they fall on some specific dates in 1 year, and they're kind of reddish in tint. And even though none of those actually appeared over Israel in any way, which you'd think would be the original intent of any passage dealing with that it would be visible from the place people would be reading it, but no matter. Even though you couldn't even see it from there, this is still finally the thing that is supposed to make non-believers believe. Do you know anyone who is not a theist who would be like, what? 4 lunar eclipses? How might I be saved? Because I don't know anyone like that. I've never heard of anyone like that. I don't think that's how people become Christians. So whether you're trying to say that all of this end times mongering is pointing you toward repentance, or pointing people toward telling others about Jesus, or pointing non-believers toward belief, I would say all of that stuff is already abundantly clear in the Bible from far more understandable passages and phrases and examples. And belief, like, there's not much in here that indicates that if somebody sees a pagan omen, that would prompt them to believe in the God of Israel and Jesus. It'd prompt them to believe in some kind of pagan God. So what's the end game? Why even do it? What's the upside? I'll tell you what I think it is. I think it's a way to take something that frankly can get kind of boring for people. Like, I became a Christian and believe in Jesus and stuff, and now we sing the same dumb songs all the time, and I've read the Bible once. I got a lot out of it. I think I mostly understand what's in there. I'm probably good. I don't know what to do next. I need some pizzazz in my religion, and that can be hard to get from a 2,000-year-old religion. What? Snakes and walls? What? Blood moons? What? Fish in the Dead Sea? There's some spice for my religion. Now we're having fun again. I could go on about this for a long time. I need to land this plane at some point, so I'm going to give myself 3 closing thoughts. 1, there are actual consequences to weird prophecy mongering. If what thinking about prophecy or how things will end someday in the Bible prompts you toward is loving your neighbor, diligently studying the scriptures, and thinking seriously about your own walk with God in humility, well, then I think you're reading it right. If what it prompts in you is a sense of hope that the God who did all this stuff here and who has been master of history is still the master of history, and that there is a resolution to all of these things coming, and that he's good and he's just and he knows what he's doing. Good! It is meant to say that the Bible doesn't end with the Bible, that there is an end game to all of this, and that history, in some way or another, is going to get wrapped up and completed, and that God will reign in a way that's visible and evident to everyone. And if you're at this point in the video and you don't believe that stuff, I'm sure that sounds absolutely crazy to you, but that is a central hope of the Bible and of Christian faith. If it prompts those things in you, I think you're doing it right, and I think that's great, and I could probably use more of that in my own life. But so often, this manifests in that weird, obsessive conspiracy mindset that I was describing a minute ago, or even in bizarre voting patterns. I think this is part of the reason for the division that we have in our country and in the West in general today. I think people outside the Christian voting circle look at the way we think about foreign policy and ethics, and some of it makes sense. And then because some of it is a weird Frankenstein of poorly thought through, incoherent beliefs about the end times, we vote in bizarre ways in terms of Israel and foreign policy and things like that. And I think it makes people outside of Christianity look at Christians with tremendous suspicion. You guys are playing by a totally different set of rules, and one that you don't seem to agree on, one that doesn't seem to line up very well even with your document. It seems totally speculative, but your votes have the power to create binding law and even the use of force. Now, I'm not saying that people outside of Christianity don't have their own weird quirks and vote in their own weird ways. I suppose we all do. But I think that's really problematic, and it makes it hard for us to partner with people who don't believe what we believe in general, and frankly, hard to even partner within Christian circles between people who might take a little more skeptical long view, like myself, and someone who has unlocked all the secret Bible codes, and therefore we need to vote for this guy and that thing and that policy, even though they don't actually make sense in real world terms. Further, I think that it is enormously problematic that we would interpret any of these passages about the end times as meaning that we need to do something. Like, where's the stuff in the Bible that's like, well, then there's the mark of the beast and the Antichrist, and look out for that and stop it. Or, well, if you want Jesus to come back, first the Antichrist has to happen. Which should we do? Shouldn't we want there to be the Antichrist? Because there's the Antichrist. Does that mean Jesus comes back after that? Or should we be against it because the Antichrist is really bad? And the mark of the beast, like whatever that means, like, wait, are we for that? Because that means things are moving along, or are we against it? And so I'll always hear Christians be like, oh, I think that guy's the Antichrist. It's scary. I was like, well, is it? Because Jesus is coming back, and if we're going to play this game that way, wouldn't you be for Jesus coming back? Bottom line is this. I just don't see stuff in the Bible that says, go make the end times happen. Vote for things to make things unfold in a certain way so that then God, who apparently in this model is very weak and is just waiting for us to get things in line politically so that he can then act and bring about a resolution to the world, then and only then can God get around to doing what he was going to do so we can enjoy his return and everything that comes along with that. I don't know. My conception of God is one that is much more powerful than that and sovereign than that, and is not waiting around on us to make political decisions internationally. That was all one point. I said I had three, and that only counts as the first one. Second closing point. It could be argued, tongue-in-cheekly, that if you really want Jesus to come back, and as Matthew 24 says, nobody's going to know the day or the hour, then stop guessing dates. Like, maybe God's just waiting around for one lousy day where some nutcase doesn't guess that's the day. Like, what if we just did a thing where we sent a letter around to all the churches and all the people with the yarn and the thumbtacks and the newspaper clippings, and we were like, this is just an experiment. We're just all not going to guess November 28th, 2020. And we'll just see if nobody guesses that one, if maybe then I'm freed up for Jesus to come back. Now, obviously, I'm making fun of the situation. I don't think we get to control or dictate to God, as I was just saying. But there is an absurdity to this whole movement and this whole trend that it clearly says no one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son. And the context makes it clear that we're talking about this whole end day, day of the Lord thing. It's right there, and yet people keep guessing. Clearly the impulse of the text is to say, don't guess. You don't need to guess. It's a fool's errand. It's a waste of time. Don't bother. And in fact, everybody who has ever guessed has been wrong. Let that sink in. Or let me phrase it a different way. If you choose to be a part of the next guess or the next unraveling of biblical prophecy secrets revealed, you're going to be wrong. This text guarantees it. You will be wrong. Do you want to be wrong? I try to avoid it when I can, and it feels kind of silly and bad when I am, but it doesn't work like this. So since we have an unlimited track record of wrongness on this, it might be better to just stop and instead adopt a general stance as Christians of readiness and attentiveness. Why has so much time passed between Jesus' resurrection and whatever now is? That's like 2,000 years-ish. Why? Why wouldn't the resurrection happen and then Jesus be, like, hey, everybody who thought I was guilty and needed to be killed, surprise, I actually am God in the flesh, and you all were wrong. And you all get judged for killing me and being wrong. And all the rest of you, let's go to heaven. Why not? What would motivate God to have this weird in-between time that we seem to be in right now if you accept this narrative? I got a theory. I think this whole exercise, and I mean all of it, from creating matter to creating people to creating ideas and emotions and love and all of the blueprints for existence that exist in the mind of God, I think all of this is designed to somehow point to the perfect, infinite, flawless nature of God. If you or I made our entire existence about pointing out our own awesomeness, we would be arrogant jerks because we're not that awesome. We are not perfect. We have flaws. But what if an actually perfect being existed? Well, in that case, it would be hypocritical and flawed for that being to do anything other than acknowledge, I'm the perfect, flawless being. God is not an exaggerated version of us. God, as held out in the scriptures and as we reason to, is an unlimited, perfect being, better than us, other than us. I think what God is doing with all of existence is stacking the deck more and more and more to let more and more and more things point to his glory and his perfection. This is going to sound like crazy talk for those of you who aren't Christians, but thanks for sitting in with this part anyway. How many more people have experienced the brokenness and fallenness of life in a broken, fallen world? How many more people have experienced problems and hurt that was not of their making, of which they are victims? How many more people have experienced personal failure and problems and hurt that is their own dang fault? How many more people have experienced inflicting violence and hurt on others? And how many more people have experienced an encounter with God and being redeemed from that screwed up, broken stuff that comes with living in this world because these 2,000 years have passed? I mean, how many people were alive when this went down? I honestly don't know. I mean, it certainly was calculable in the millions, not the billions as it is now. How many people have lived since then? How many more people have had the opportunity to be objects of the grace of God, objects of the correction of God in that amount of time? How about you? How about me? It's weird, even now, when I hear people say, or even when I feel the impulse to say, like, that news is terrible. Things are so bad. Jesus, come quickly. Well, Christians are supposed to root for that, but I'm torn on that. I know what the Bible says, but also I kind of feel like, Jesus, take your time. Because right now, I'm not going to see my grandkids in eternity because they're still dead. They don't exist yet. I don't know who they are yet. I don't know what they're going to be like. But I'd like for them to exist, and I'd like for them to get a crack at it. Is that an entirely selfish motive? Yep. Maybe even bordering on stupid, but it's honest. And, well, what if God had come back? What if God had come back, I don't know, 50 years ago? I'm out. Dude, what if God had come back 20 years ago? Some of you are out. The point is, we get angry at God sometimes for the hurt and suffering in the world, but if we accept this narrative, then on the other hand, what God is doing is enduring along with us the hurt and suffering of the world, because the opportunity to keep redeeming increases exponentially with each passing year. That hurt and suffering and yuck of the world is endured and allowed to persist in this temporary state while God brings about redemption in the midst of the yuck. What that means is, I'm not even sure. Let me phrase that differently. I don't want to rush God. I trust that he has a formula in his brain, and when the time comes to redeem, when it's time to resolve all the things and move to the next phase of whatever history is, and that is way beyond my understanding, and I'm not even going to try to make videos acting like I get this or what will happen. But whenever that moment happens, I have to trust that the infinite being who is author of this existence and the redemptive plan is going to knock it out of the park, and it will be at the correct moment when the ratios are right for how much more glory and redemption would point to his awesomeness and how much more suffering and pain can we really deal with here. He'll get it right. One of the impulses I don't like about the prophecy mongering thing, in addition to it feeling very exploitative and very academically dishonest, is I don't like the aspect of it that feels like it's rushing God. I'm cool with his timeline. If I were God, I'm sure my timeline would be different and I'm sure it would suck. But I trust his, and I have to be good with that as a Christian, which means that so much of this conversation that we see in these headlines and with this kind of thinking, I think is just misguided, even at that very big 10,000 foot level. Thanks for diving deep into this content with me. I welcome your disagreement, even though I might lay low on this comment section. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. You're patient. I appreciate you whether we think the same stuff or not. Thank you for letting me disagree with you if it's not, and we'll see you soon.